The quantum spires of the Centauri Institute pierced the violet sky, their crystalline surfaces refracting the light of 3 suns in an ever-shifting display of mathematical precision. ZYX-427 adjusted their sensory membranes, allowing the full spectrum of the Institute's quantum architecture to flood their consciousness. As the youngest ever graduate of the Proxima Advanced Sciences Academy, they had earned their place among the galaxy's brightest minds. But today was different. Today marked the arrival of the first human exchange student in the Institute's 12,000-year history. The news had spread through the quantum network like a viral equation. A human, accepted into the most prestigious mathematical institution in the known universe. Many faculty members had protested, arguing that a species that still relied on mechanical computers couldn't possibly grasp the complexities of quantum mathematics. Others cited the Galactic Council's push for diversity, suggesting this was merely a political gesture. ZYX-427 drifted through the grand atrium, their hover field maintaining perfect stability as they observed the gathering crowd. Various species had assembled, the gaseous nebulons in their containment spheres, the crystalline symmetrians with their geometrically perfect forms, and even a few energy-based Luxarians, their photonic bodies carefully tuned to avoid disrupting the sensitive quantum equipment. Quite the spectacle, isn't it? Professor Vex Sigma materialized beside ZYX-427, her probability field flickering with amusement. One would think we were witnessing the arrival of a quantum anomaly rather than a student. With all due respect, Professor, ZYX-427 modulated their voice frequencies carefully, isn't accepting a human into our advanced quantum mathematics program exactly that, an anomaly? Before Vex Sigma could respond, the Institute's quantum barriers rippled, announcing the arrival of the transport vessel. The sleek ship, designed to accommodate various species' biological needs, settled onto the landing pad with surprising grace for human-piloted technology. The vessel's door dissolved into a cascade of particles, and Sarah Chen stepped out into the atrium. She actually walked, on biological locomotion appendages, wearing what appeared to be a standard Earth environmental suit modified with quantum shielding. Her movements were unnaturally linear, lacking the fluid probability shifts that characterized most advanced species. "Welcome to the Centauri Institute," Vex Sigma projected, her energy form expanding in a traditional greeting pattern. "I trust your quantum tunnel transfer was comfortable." Sarah smiled, a peculiar movement of facial muscles that humans use to convey positive emotions. "Thank you, Professor. The journey was fascinating. I've never experienced 11-dimensional space travel before." ZYX-427 noticed something odd. While the human's technology might be primitive, her eyes moved across the quantum architecture with surprising understanding. She wasn't just seeing the surface, she was observing the mathematical principles that govern the structure's very existence. "You'll be paired with ZYX-427 for your initial orientation," Vex Sigma announced, causing ZYX-427's probability field to fluctuate in surprise. "They're our most promising young researcher in quantum topology." Sarah turned those observant eyes toward ZYX-427. "I've read your paper on nonlinear probability cascades in 7-dimensional space. The way you approached the paradox resolution was brilliant." ZYX-427 felt their field fluctuate again, this time with confusion. How could she have read their paper? The mathematical concepts involved required direct neural interface with a quantum computer to even begin comprehending the basic principles. "Unless I had it translated into standard mathematical notation," Sarah explained, seemingly reading their confusion. "Sometimes the old ways work just fine." As they guided Sarah through the Institute's quantum laboratories, ZYX-427 found themselves increasingly intrigued. The human asked surprisingly insightful questions about quantum probability fields and dimensional mathematics. Yet she took notes with a primitive marking device on processed plant material, refusing the offered neural interface equipment. "Don't you find it limiting?" ZYX-427 finally asked, indicating her antiquated note-taking method. The upcoming multiversal calculations exam requires processing mathematical concepts that even our most advanced quantum computers struggle with. Sarah paused in her writing, that strange smile appearing again. Different doesn't always mean limiting. Sometimes understanding comes from unexpected places. Later that evening, as ZYX-427 reviewed the day's events in their quantum meditation chamber, an idea began to form. If the human was somehow managing to grasp advanced mathematical concepts without proper quantum computational assistance, imagine what she could achieve with a little help. The upcoming exam would be the perfect opportunity to prove that even the most promising human needed technological advancement to truly succeed. ZYX-427's probability field pulsed with anticipation. They would design a neural transmitter, something subtle enough to bypass the exam's quantum security protocols. After all, they were only trying to help Sarah reach her full potential. What could possibly go wrong? In the privacy of their chamber, ZYX-427 began drafting plans for the device, unaware that their well-intentioned intervention was about to unlock mysteries of the human mind that would challenge everything they thought they knew about mathematics, consciousness, and the very nature of reality itself. The quantum fabrication lab hummed with possibility as ZYX-427 manipulated strands of probability into increasingly complex patterns. 3 cycles had passed since Sarah Chen's arrival, and the multiversal calculations exam loomed just 5 rotations away. The neural transmitter was nearly complete, its nanoscale quantum circuits disguised as standard academic enhancement implants. "You're still here." The familiar resonance of Dr. Ax Lambda filled the lab, causing ZYX-427's probability field to ripple with startled frequencies. The senior researcher's crystalline form refracted the lab's quantum lighting in suspicious patterns. The fabrication lab closed to students 2 time units ago. Special project approval, ZYX-427 projected smoothly, their field modulating to display the falsified authorization they generated. Research into enhanced learning methodologies for non-quantum species. Dr. Ax Lambda's crystalline structure shifted in what might have been skepticism, but the authorization held up under scrutiny. Fascinating. And does this research have anything to do with our human exchange student? Simply trying to level the playing field, ZYX-427 responded, carefully keeping their field frequencies stable. It seems unfair to expect a species without natural quantum processing capabilities to compete at our level. Interesting perspective. Dr. Ax Lambda moved closer, examining the delicate quantum circuitry spread across the fabrication surface. Though I must say, Ms. Chen seems to be adapting remarkably well. Her solution to yesterday's probability cascade problem was unconventional. ZYX-427 remembered the incident clearly. While other students had used quantum computers to calculate the optimal path through a 13-dimensional probability maze, Sarah had simply sketched something on her paper and arrived at the correct answer. Pure luck, obviously. Natural talent can only take one so far, ZYX-427 projected diplomatically. The multiversal calculations exam requires processing power beyond organic capabilities. After Dr. Ax Lambda finally departed, ZYX-427 returned to their work with renewed urgency. The neural transmitter's quantum core pulsed with soft light as they made final adjustments to its consciousness-linking algorithms. The device was a masterpiece of unauthorized engineering, capable of establishing a quantum connection between 2 minds without triggering the Institute's security protocols. The next day, ZYX-427 observed Sarah in their shared advanced quantum topology class. She sat near the probability field generator, that primitive writing implement moving across her paper as Professor Vex Sigma demonstrated the collapse of a 15-dimensional function matrix. Ms. Chen, Vex Sigma projected, her energy form brightening with interest. Would you care to explain how you arrived at this solution without using the quantum visualization interface? Sarah stood, holding up her paper covered in what appeared to be simple 2-dimensional drawings. Well, if you consider the 15 dimensions as nested sets of triangular relationships, you can map the collapse points using basic geometric principles. The class erupted in harmonic frequencies of confusion. Even Professor Vex Sigma's energy form flickered uncertainly. But, that's not possible. The computational requirements alone. Sometimes we make things more complicated than they need to be, Sarah smiled, that maddeningly confident human expression. Nature often finds the simplest path through complexity. Later, in their private quantum meditation chamber, ZYX-427 made the final calibrations to the neural transmitter. Sarah's seemingly impossible mathematical insights had only strengthened their resolve. If she could do this much with primitive human cognition, imagine what she could achieve with access to proper quantum processing. The device would activate during the exam, creating a subtle link between their minds. ZYX-427 would be able to assist Sarah by sharing their advanced computational capabilities. They weren't technically helping her cheat, more like providing her with the tools she should have had access to anyway. As they prepared for sleep cycle, ZYX-427's probability field rippled with anticipation. Tomorrow would be the first test of the neural transmitter. Just a small experiment during their shared quantum ethics seminar, the irony wasn't lost on them, to ensure everything worked properly. What ZYX-427 didn't notice, as they drifted into quantum sleep states, was the slight irregularity in the transmitter's probability field. A tiny fluctuation that suggested the device might do more than just establish a one-way connection. In their certainty of human limitations, they had failed to consider a crucial possibility: what if the human mind had capabilities that their quantum technology wasn't designed to process? The answer to that question would soon shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about consciousness, computation, and the fundamental nature of mathematical reality. But for now, ZYX-427 slept peacefully, dreaming in quantum probabilities of their impending triumph, unaware that they were about to learn a lesson about human cognition that no amount of advanced technology could have prepared them for. The multiversal calculations exam chamber was a marvel of quantum engineering, its perfectly spherical space constructed from pure probability fields. As students filed in, their various forms adapted to individual examination pods designed to prevent any unauthorized sharing of consciousness. ZYX-427 felt the subtle weight of the neural transmitter, now fully integrated into their secondary neural cluster. Remember, Professor Vex Sigma's energy form expanded to address the assembled students. This examination will test your understanding of reality itself. Any attempt to circumvent the quantum isolation protocols will result in immediate disqualification and possible dimensional displacement. ZYX-427's probability field rippled with what might have been guilt, quickly suppressed. The neural transmitter was undetectable. They'd tested it thoroughly during yesterday's quantum ethics seminar. The irony of that successful test still escaped them. Sarah Chen sat 3 pods away, arranging her primitive writing tools with methodical precision. No quantum interface, no probability computer, not even a basic dimensional calculator. Just processed tree pulp and a carbon-based marking implement. Several nearby symmetrians vibrated with frequencies that could only be interpreted as derision. The exam materialized simultaneously across all pods, its quantum encrypted problems shimmering with possibility. ZYX-427 allowed themselves a moment of satisfaction before activating the neural transmitter. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The first problem appeared: calculate the probability collapse of a 17-dimensional object passing through a 4-dimensional aperture while experiencing temporal recursion in 3 alternate timelines. ZYX-427 began the complex calculations, feeling the comfortable hum of their quantum processors. Now to establish the link with Sarah's mind and provide her with proper computational assistance. The neural transmitter activated with a subtle quantum pulse. ZYX-427 reached out, expecting to find the simple, linear thought patterns of a human brain. What they encountered instead defied every principle of consciousness they had ever studied. Sarah's mind wasn't calculating the problem, she was living it. In her consciousness, the 17-dimensional object existed as a tangible thing, its properties as real and obvious as color to a Luxarian. She didn't see the four-dimensional aperture as a mathematical construct, but as a door, a passage, its quantum states flowing like water. The temporal recursions. She was dancing through them, treating multiple timelines like parallel paths in a garden, intuitively understanding their intersections and divergences. ZYX 427's probability field fluctuated wildly as their minds struggled to process what they were witnessing. This wasn't calculation, it was a fundamentally different way of perceiving reality itself. Is everything alright? Professor Vec Sigma's concerned projection reached their pod. Your quantum signatures are showing unusual fluctuation patterns. Fine, ZYX 427 managed to project, but they were far from fine. The neural transmitter, designed to impose their ordered, computational thought patterns onto a primitive, human mind, was instead being overwhelmed by Sarah's impossible way of seeing mathematics. Through their inadvertent connection, ZYX 427 watched in awe and mounting horror as Sarah approached each problem not as a series of calculations, but as a landscape to be explored. Multidimensional spaces bloomed in her thoughts like flowers opening to sunlight. Quantum probabilities danced like constellations, their patterns obvious to her in ways that made ZYX 427's most advanced computational methods seem clumsy and crude. The neural transmitter began to overheat, its quantum circuits struggling to translate Sarah's intuitive mathematical understanding into something ZYX 427's mind could process. Warning signals flashed across their consciousness, quantum coherence destabilizing. Neural pattern synchronization exceeding safe parameters. But they couldn't disconnect. Sarah's mind had become a gravity well of pure mathematical insight, drawing them deeper into her unique perception of reality. Through their link, ZYX 427 began to glimpse the truth. Humans hadn't needed to develop quantum computers because their minds were capable of something far more profound, they could feel the mathematics that underlay reality itself. The exam chamber's quantum isolation fields began to flicker as the neural transmitter's destabilizing effects rippled outward. Other students looked up from their work, their various sensory organs registering the growing disturbance in the probability fields. Professor Vec Sigma's energy form crackled with alarm. Something's wrong with the quantum containment grid. These fluctuation patterns, they're impossible. Sarah paused in her work, her pencil hovering above the paper. Through their connection, ZYX 427 felt her become aware of their presence in her mind, felt her surprise turn to understanding. But instead of anger at the attempted deception, they sensed something else, compassion, and an offer of help. Because Sarah had already recognized what ZYX 427 was only beginning to understand, that the neural transmitter was about to collapse, taking the exam chamber's quantum stability with it. And when that happened, the resulting dimensional cascade would affect everyone in the room. The only question was, could a human's intuitive grasp of mathematical reality save them from the technological disaster ZYX 427 had created in their arrogance? They were about to find out, whether they wanted to or not. Reality itself seemed to shudder as the neural transmitter's quantum circuits overloaded. The exam chamber's probability fields twisted in ways that made even the energy-based Luxarians flicker with distress. Through their deteriorating connection, ZYX 427 felt Sarah's mind shift from mathematical contemplation to focused problem-solving with frightening speed. Everyone remained calm, Professor Vec Sigma projected, her energy form stretching thin as she tried to contain the spreading quantum instability. The dimensional stabilizers will, she cut off as the stabilizers themselves began to emit a high-pitched whine, their crystalline matrices cracking under the strain of conflicting probability fields. They can't handle it, Sarah's voice cut through the growing chaos. She had stood up, ignoring the exam chamber's protocol completely. The stabilizers are trying to impose order on the quantum fluctuations, but they're only making it worse. ZYX 427 wanted to disconnect the neural transmitter, to sever the link that was causing this catastrophe, but they couldn't. Their consciousness was too entangled with Sarah's unique way of perceiving reality. Through her eyes, they watched the mathematical disaster unfold not in equations or probability matrices, but as a living, breathing thing. The dimensional barriers are beginning to crack, one of the Symmetrians chimed in, their crystalline form vibrating with terror. We're seeing bleed through from at least 7 parallel timelines. Students began to panic. The gaseous nebulons contracted into tight, defensive spheres. The Luxarians dimmed their photonic bodies to minimal output. Even the normally stoic Symmetrians were losing their geometric perfection, their edges becoming worryingly fuzzy as reality itself began to fray. But Sarah remained calm. Through their connection, ZYX-427 felt her mind working not in the linear, computational way they had expected of humans, but in sweeping, intuitive leaps that somehow encompassed the entire problem at once. "Professor," Sarah called out, her voice steady despite the chaos, "we need to stop fighting the quantum fluctuations. The stabilizers are approaching this like a mathematical problem to be solved, but it's more like a dance. We need to work with the natural flow of probability, not against it." Absurd. Dr. Axlambda's voice cut through the chamber as he rushed in, his crystalline form already deploying emergency quantum dampeners. "This facility represents 12,000 years of advanced mathematical engineering. We can't just look." Sarah interrupted, grabbing her paper and quickly sketching something. "The probability fields aren't collapsing randomly. There's a pattern, but you can't see it because you're too focused on the individual quantum states. Step back, look at the whole picture." Through their neural link, ZYX-427 saw what she saw. The quantum fluctuations weren't just mathematical anomalies, they were parts of a larger pattern, like waves in an ocean. Each disruption led naturally to the next, forming a complex but ultimately harmonious dance of probability. "She's right," ZYX-427 projected, their voice modulator crackling with the strain. "Our stabilizers are trying to force each quantum state into alignment individually, but the pattern, it's beautiful once you see it." Dr. Axlambda's crystalline form shifted skeptically, but Professor Vexigma's energy field pulsed with sudden understanding. "The human perspective, it's not primitive at all, is it? It's just different. Instead of processing reality as discrete mathematical units, they see the connections," ZYX-427 finished, their probability field fluctuating with the revelation. "All this time, we thought they were behind us technologically, but they never needed quantum computers because they could intuitively grasp what we spent millennia learning to calculate." Sarah was already moving, her hands flying across her paper. "If we reconfigure the stabilizers to work with the natural probability flows instead of trying to contain them." She thrust the paper toward Dr. Axlambda. "Like this. Quick, before the dimensional barriers completely fail." The crystalline researcher hesitated for just a moment before his scientific curiosity overcame his prejudice. His form shifted as he absorbed the simple yet profound elegance of Sarah's solution. "This is impossible," he whispered, even as his crystalline appendages began reconfiguring the stabilizer controls. "The mathematical principles involved, you did this without any quantum computational assistance." Sometimes, Sarah smiled, even as reality buckled around them, the simplest solution is just to step back and see the bigger picture. As the stabilizers were recalibrated according to Sarah's specifications, the wild quantum fluctuations began to smooth out, not through forced computational correction, but by flowing naturally into more stable patterns. The dimensional barriers strengthened, no longer fighting against the probability fields but working in harmony with them. But for ZYX-427, still linked to Sarah's consciousness through the failing neural transmitter, the danger was far from over. Their mind, trained for millennia of evolution to process reality in rigid mathematical terms, was being forced to perceive it through a radically different lens. The strain was becoming too much to bear. As the quantum stabilizers brought the dimensional anomalies under control, ZYX-427's consciousness began to fragment. The neural transmitter, still stubbornly maintaining its connection to Sarah's mind, was forcing them to perceive reality in a way their brain simply wasn't designed to handle. Their probability field flickered erratically, quantum patterns dissolving into chaos. Something's wrong with ZYX for 27, Professor Vex Sigma projected urgently. Their neural patterns are destabilizing at the quantum level. Sarah turned away from the stabilizer controls, her eyes finding ZYX 427's trembling form immediately. Through their fading connection, he felt her quick assessment of the situation, not as a series of calculations, but as an immediate, intuitive understanding of cause and effect. The neural transmitter, she said, moving toward them with purposeful strides. You tried to link our minds during the exam, didn't you? But you didn't account for the fundamental differences in how we perceive reality. Impossible. Dr. Axlambda's crystalline form vibrated with shock. The security protocols were designed to detect quantum computational aids, Sarah finished. Not a consciousness-linking device. Because who would be crazy enough to attempt that? She reached ZYX 427's pod, her expression showing not anger but concern. And now your mind is caught between two ways of seeing reality, unable to reconcile them. ZYX 427 tried to respond, but their voice modulator had failed completely. Their consciousness was stretched between two irreconcilable perspectives, the precise, computational framework they had always known, and Sarah's flowing, intuitive grasp of mathematical reality. I can help, Sarah said softly, pulling out her ever-present paper and pencil. But you'll have to trust me. And more importantly, you'll have to trust yourself to see things differently. Through their connection, ZYX 427 felt her begin to draw. But she wasn't just making marks on paper, she was creating a bridge between two ways of understanding reality. The simple geometric shapes she sketched somehow captured both the rigid precision of quantum mathematics and the flowing, organic nature of intuitive understanding. Look, she instructed, holding up the paper. Not with your quantum processors or your probability analyzers. Just, look. See how the mathematics flows naturally from one state to another. How each equation is just a different way of describing the same underlying reality. ZYX 427's failing consciousness focused on the drawing. At first, they saw only primitive lines and curves, a hopelessly simplified representation of complex quantum states. But then, slowly, something changed. The lines began to move, not physically, but in their understanding. Each curve suggested another, each intersection pointed to new possibilities. The mathematics wasn't just symbols on paper, it was a map of reality itself. That's it, Sarah encouraged, as she felt their shared consciousness begin to stabilize. You don't have to abandon your way of seeing things. Just, expand it. Let both perspectives exist together. Around them, the other students and faculty watched in amazement as ZYX 427's probability field gradually stabilized, taking on a new pattern none of them had ever seen before. It wasn't purely computational like a normal quantum being's field, nor was it as freely flowing as Sarah's thought patterns. It was something new, a synthesis of both approaches. The neural transmitter, its purpose fulfilled in an entirely unexpected way, finally deactivated. But the change it had catalyzed couldn't be undone. ZYX 427 would never see reality quite the same way again. I believe, Professor Vex Sigma projected thoughtfully, we have all learned something profound today about the nature of intelligence and understanding. Perhaps it's time to reconsider our assumptions about primitive species. And maybe, Sarah added with a smile, returning to her exam pod, reconsider the idea that there's only one right way to solve a problem. Dr. Axlambda's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been embarrassment. The examination will, of course, need to be rescheduled. And as for the unauthorized neural transmitter, I believe, Vex Sigma interrupted, her energy form brightening, that the unprecedented insights gained from this incident far outweigh any academic infractions. Though perhaps, ZYX 427, in the future you might consider simply asking for help when you want to understand a different perspective. ZYX 427, their voice modulator finally back online, managed to project a response, I think. I think I'm beginning to understand that the most advanced technology isn't always the best solution. Sometimes the simplest approach, like watching, listening, and learning from others, is the most sophisticated after all. As the examination chamber slowly emptied, Sarah lingered behind. You know, she said, humans didn't reject quantum computers because we couldn't build them. We just found that sometimes, the most powerful computer is the one we're born with, especially when we learn to see things from new perspectives. ZYX 427's probability field rippled with newfound understanding. They had sought to help a primitive species master advanced mathematics, only to discover that true advancement sometimes meant embracing simpler, more intuitive ways of understanding the universe. It was a lesson they would never forget, written not in quantum states or probability fields, but in the simple marks of a pencil on paper.